Hi everyone, welcome to our HR 2023 with Ribea, 2024 with Ribea Elise discussing. Last year we discussed the year 2023, our business restructuring, and where is our generation required to be finding themselves at when it comes to restructuring and structuring business in season, when it comes to our requirement to respond to our generation's requirement in season. And that includes the international world, what their requirements are in season, and how is it that as business owners and parliamentary leaders, political leaders, and as the people of the country, how are we required to respond to what is required amongst our generation in season. We have mentioned before that we are doing this year black and white overruled with color. And we are starting the year with that, with our Leading This Generation discussion. And for those people who have already listened in on Leading This Generation, I have given a little bit of a draft through on what we're going to talk about this year. And I have given a little bit of pinpoints on where we should be headed with structuring and with office building in our generation and in our season. We realize that everything that we do are building office, and we have responsibility when it comes to the people of the country in general. We have responsibility when it comes to the state of the world in general. We have a responsibility to respond to that. That is what is required amongst our people in our different countries, rather than wanting to only respond to the circumstances that you find in your country that you are at. Remember, the world is different and we are international on social media, and that is why a business of Vogue are educating and structuring on social media. You can press in on all our podcasts. Our podcast explains a little bit of where I find myself at in my education journey, where I find myself at in my representation journey, and where I find myself at with leading where I'm at in my season, right? And with my career history, educational history, with my household upbringing, I share a little bit of everything included in the business of Vogue that I'm required to share on. And that is for a little bit of Ribea Elise, and this everywhere that you can press play on my videos. You can press play, and don't be distracted by the nails, because we love when we have the nails to shift the nails around. It's nice. And I've learned that it's very interesting and it's very nice to talk with these interesting nails. Another thing that I want to mention on office this year is I'm going to draft us through 2 set programs that countries are currently using, and I don't want to be restricted to where we are starting it with HR 2024, because everything else we discuss in Leading This Generation, if people want to listen in a little bit of information about different opinions that I have with what is happening in the world, then Leading This Generation has got an opinion for everything. But I want to really focus now on our structuring processes that includes the South African governmental processes. And because I'm South African born, I have a responsibility, finding myself in an international country, having to learn the challenges that the international world have. I always say that it's sometimes not your responsibility to go and give your opinion on circumstances in the world, but it becomes our responsibility when it affects us, right? So when Ribea educates that our principal responsibility being human beings is to create an environment that is fine for us, right? To adhere to our requirements and our right from wrongs in season. And when you learn that your responsibility that you owe to yourself affects so many people, and when we allow ourselves to educate that, then we find ourselves in that we are in the realization that everything that we do becomes business. Whatever we do in our countries, what we find ourselves busy with, becomes a requirement to structure the process, because someone else might find themselves busy with that process, and the process might just get a little bit out of hand, right? And when the process gets a little bit out of hand and out of control, then we have out of hand and out of control, then we have a responsibility. And our responsibility that we owe ourselves, when I say with the left hand, a little bit of out of control, and I want to say with the right hand, then you allow yourself to, because your right from wrong is not necessarily that you are going to have to do right the whole time, and nothing in this world is ever wrong, because the left hand is our responsibility to acknowledge your left hand as well as your right hand, the left education as well as the right education. But we are not going to have ourselves distracted in so much discussions about the fact that there's nothing wrong, and the fact that everyone sometimes requires people to learn that certain processes are only right processes, right? And therefore, I educate on business evoke a little bit on whatever challenges that our generation find themselves at, that I have found myself in the education room of that, and also in the experience that I've had throughout the years, and also based on my personality, my womb that I'm born in, how do I, Ribea, then present myself in business in all the functions that I present myself at. And therefore, I'm just going to take us through a journey that I had when I was employed at Nibblebits, right? And I was employed as, I had different functions, right? In human resources, recruitment, in training. I had experience in health and safety in the organization. And I had the opportunity when I was in health and safety, and I had experience in payroll itself, right? So when I was in health and safety, I had experience to learn the challenges that people might sometimes want to have something to say about, and they might not necessarily have the opportunity to always say it to the manager or to always say it to the supervisor. And they therefore sometimes love to work with people that are a plain Ribea Elise, and that would listen to them in a plain way, that would know how to relay the information to management, and that would find a solution to whatever are required in her season. And therefore, I want to draft us through what I've worked on when I was employed at Nibblebits. That is called the VIP payroll system, but that is called the SARG. In New Zealand, it's the SARG system, SARG payroll, and New Zealand works on different processes of that. South Africa works on the VIP, and you get the SARG VIP, and you can buy the complete package of that, right? And I want to educate countries that have not really allowed themselves to build offers with other international countries yet. What are the processes that you buy in? What are the functions that countries work in? There are systems, right? Technology becomes everything of the office today. And technology holds the most sensitive information of the organization itself that affects everything about the people that are employed at the offices. So why am I educating our generation then through this in my HR2023 and in my leading this generation educations? Is because we have a requirement as human beings, a responsibility as human beings, to educate. When you learn the world are challenged, when you learn that processes works and functions in a certain way, or when you learn that the world are meant to function in a certain way, and so many people want to be opposed to that, then you allow yourself that. That is, how do you educate, and how do you assist with structuring and with your leadership based on your experience? And that's where I find myself at. Not that I'm excluding myself from how the world generally functions, but the fact that I am giving myself the opportunity to educate on my own pace, right? If you have to include yourself on how the world generally functions, and you have learned that my work experiences have been in all of the different human resources functions, and the world relates to the human resources function next to the political function, next to the law function, that becomes the decision making of the country. And when you find yourself as an employee in a human resources function job, right? And you have the education, and you have the career, you have the career history, you have the education, you have the experience, then you allow yourself to listen to how does the world functions in a way where you started your career in primary school, you went to a different secondary school, you went to university or to college, you then are employed in certain functions in the country, you travel internationally, you are employed in certain functions in the country, and the day that you decide to not be employed anymore and you decide to own your own business, then most of your business might exist from your career history and based on your experience. And that's how businesses in the world are invented and are implemented, right? based on the invention that scientifically there's no way that Ribea Elise's career history relates to her Evolve business. Scientifically, there's no signs that there was an obligation for Ribea Elise after a Nibblibird's job and after all her Boland Baldet, Menzies, the airport industries, all the functions that I've worked at. There's no way that anyone says that it is an obligation to then go and educate the world based on your experience. It only becomes that when it affects you. And we live in a world where people reason around you that have been in this office, around the circumstances in your country, around how leaders in your country manage certain ways and processes. And you learn that you become the talk of the town if you have been in employment and you really find yourself unemployed and you're part of the office of the world and you are not part of it anymore. And then some people sit and question everything about you, right? And you don't necessarily go and start a business only because you learn that you might be affected by aggressions that relates to where you have been employed at and the requirement that might lead to you having a responsibility to then go and own a business and educate based on what you have learned throughout the years, right? And you don't necessarily go and educate and start a business just because of those reasons. But when we learn how the world functions in generally, then logically, after such a journey in educational history, after such a career history, after such extensive work experience, the businesses that I've been employed at, logically, the number one thing is you are on a life journey. It becomes a life journey that you are on, right? And we learn that you don't divert from that journey unless you now find yourself somewhere else. No one gives you that you are obligated to adhere to whatever responsibility you have amongst the people of the country or amongst the international world. But we've learned that the world functions in a certain way. So logically reasoning, scientifically reasoning, Ribea Elise would then have a business and the business would then be in line with implementing all the required educations that you have learned along with your career and along with your employment history, right? And that's where our business finds ourselves at, so that the world doesn't feel obligated, so that the world doesn't necessarily ignore Ribea, but so that the world doesn't necessarily sit and have people in employment and then they want to distract themselves when the people are not employed at the organizations anymore. Every part of the journey becomes a one-way road. And on that one-way road, there's so much responsibility required of all of us. And that is where we are at with the structuring processes of that, because the responsibility becomes that is an educative process for another group of people that might learn what I have learned and my experience. And that is where HR 2024 this year continues. And that is where business restructuring is the upper structure of that. And that is where Ribea Elise educates, and I educate on my business, Evoke, and where I find myself at in career, what I've learned over the years, and what I can give my opinion on what is really for me utmost important processes that countries don't realize that affect one another, and what is really our responsibility to adhere to in our generation and into where humanity finds themselves at. So let's continue with the SARS VIP payroll system, right? It's only a payroll system, but it is not necessarily a payroll system. And that's what I want to educate people on. And I have not had the opportunity to work for years on the payroll system, and it doesn't give a person like Ribea Elise what can you say? It doesn't give you the wrong tick because you have not been on the payroll system maybe for years. But because Ribea Elise, you can hear, just opens the system, see, press, clicks, and see exactly finds a way through the process or the system. And that's how I am, right? You give me the job, I find my way through it. I exactly learn what the challenges are here, and I move on with where I'm required to be at the job. And that is where we find ourselves at. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves arguing so much through to a generation of people that tells themselves that you have to be working on a system for a year or more than a year in order to know how the system functions amongst your community. No, you press play and you learn. You exactly know the challenges in the world. You press play on a computerized system and you exactly know where you are at and what people might be challenged with. And that's where we come in with the payroll, with the SART system that in South Africa is VIP. And I think the base name for that system is a SART system. And that SART system is a communication line between the organization itself, between the economical, scientifical responsibility of the country, hand in hand with the organization and its people, hand in hand with the circumstances of the country. So scientifically, the country has a responsibility, and the country has to provide for its people. Economically, the people that the country are having to provide for are required to find themselves in employment. And the system then is the process that holds the information of the organization and that works hand in hand with the requirement and the responsibility that the country has to have to its people. And that becomes the payroll system. It holds the most sensitive information of the organization. It holds sensitive information of the employee because it exactly relates to the circumstances and to the country that we find ourselves in. And that system is called the SART system. And I explain it in a way that I have been introduced to it when I scrolled through the system. And when I got familiar and when I went through my trainings, I learned that this is exactly what governments functions with when they deal with the unemployment rate in the country. And this is exactly what organizations functions with when they deal with the economy itself of the world in general and the businesses that are affected by the economy of the world. And therefore, my advice to businesses are, if you have not bought in, I do not sell SART VIP over to y'all, but it is one function that many businesses functions, and it goes hand in hand with your IRD system. It goes hand in hand with direct reporting to the government, and it goes hand in hand with the economy itself, right? How we mathematically function in the economy itself? So the base of the system is that it becomes only a payroll system. It only are required and used in businesses to hold payroll information mainly for the organization. But to Ribea, Elise, economically, it is how do we function as a country in general? How does the world function in general? Because after the VIP system that every company and organization buys in are released to the different companies, and after all of those informations are released, it goes also to one data system at the Parliamentary House that I'm not familiar with because I haven't been employed at the Parliamentary House. Have I had the opportunity to work there, I would exactly know what system would then work hand in hand with the SART, and that is the payroll system, and that SART works within South Africa and that IRD works within New Zealand itself. And because businesses itself communicates directly their sensitive economical related information to the government itself via that system, and the government itself works directly from certain systems. And one of the most best function systems is that SART system. It functions very accurately. The accurate requirement for the information to be captured into the system is an accurate requirement, so you won't necessarily get things wrong when you relay information to government itself, what relating to the organization, and when government requires companies to work hand in hand with the unemployment rate and the poverty circumstances in countries. And that is why we are talking about this system today. And that is why I, Ribea, Elise, am talking about the SART system today. And I don't want to get us distracted, right? And why do I mention my name a lot? Because some people might just, technology today are in such a way that some people sit and listens in back in the back of the computer, and they can't hear. It can exactly sometimes hear everything you say, but they don't know who it is that are talking. And that is why I say that Ribea, Elise, a vote business. I mention that quite often. Another thing, and sometimes our voices sound different, and that's why you mention your name, because people only listen in, and our devices today place in everyone's house anyway. And that is, you can just hear sometimes voices in your house from recordings and from televisions and from computers in your house. And that's why when you say your name, it sometimes becomes easier. Another thing that we want to focus on when we work on the SART system today is I want to focus with South Africa specifically, because South Africa has a responsibility to the international world. The international world depends on South Africa for certain structures that they are structuring the international world with. And when we learn that South Africa itself, when we learn that the universities in South Africa itself works hand in hand with the most advanced, I call it advanced, the most experienced historical universities in the world, specifically the law universities in America that works hand in hand with the South Africans, and that works hand in hand with Stellenbosch University, with UCT University, with University of Pretoria, with all your main universities in South Africa. We need the processes that sometimes easily go to another country to be processes that are structured in a way to be non-abusive. Because remember, in South Africa, we find ourselves still dealing with a group of people that lives in poverty. And Ribea Elise was one of those people that people feel that when I have to deal with Ribea Elise's household, then we might rather strike the house down rather than dealing with the poverty circumstance of the house. And because we have a world that reasons like that, and a world that reasons rather to strike you down because you become that thing that I have written about, that says some things in this world are meant to be, some Ribea Elises and families, we are all meant to be in this world, and we just need to structure ourselves so that we find our way easier in life itself. And therefore, when we learned that the communication that goes directly from South Africa are directly going to certain countries. And the people that find themselves sitting in meetings in the international world that relates to law meetings, that relates to aggressions in the world, that relates to the economy of the world, that relates to the scientific effect that the processes have on the world in general, then we learn that we have a responsibility to educate South Africa, that no matter how South Africa feels that they have had the educational background and the career history, Ribea Elise feels that the circumstances in the country needs to be in hand with your information that you share to the international world in general, and the processes that are then relating to how the world might be affected with that we sometimes so often find ourselves, South African people that are staying in South Africa, and now they communicate to America about the law and about crime, the crime rate, and about the poverty and about businesses, and then South Africa are yet so disadvantaged in the world. And then South Africans find themselves in so much poverty in the world. South Africa is one of those countries where there's your next door neighbor that earns 50,000 rand, and the neighbor next to that doesn't have a financial income, that doesn't have a piece of bread. And only because of that structuring responsibility that we have as a country in general, we are educating, and I'm educating in my season, that the information and the businesses that finds themselves sitting in different countries, that finds themselves having people of South Africa managing those processes for them, have to, not the businesses in the international world. I'm talking about South African people that sits today in South Africa, and they are sharing information to America based on the crime rate, based on the implementations of processes, based on legislative laws that needs to be updated, based on the economy of the world, based on approval for this business and that business, based on the state that South Africa is at. They need to structure themselves, and America needs to know what information that they receive from South Africa are they required to implement in their countries. Because no way can the world go around implementing abusive processes into the world that are abusive to the people of the country, and then the processes should still be implemented into other international countries. It is that we have to educate. And we do not say that the government of South Africa are not doing their part, because they are doing their part. But remember, South Africa is still dealing with the colored of South Africa that are fighting the African American political parties. And when those teams of people can learn to sit around one table, and they can learn to structure that process, then America can take information from there and implement it in their country. And then other international countries can take complete information from that and implement it in their countries. Remember, if America or Africa or Europe is gonna now listen to the information that comes from South Africa itself, and the South African political team sits in the law discussions that relates to crime in America, then the South African person is going to say, don't give a business to that house, don't give a business to that house, give that house money, give that house nothing, and that's going to be the process. And that is why we are required to educate the world that if we are structuring in such a way, then we might as well not structure. Then we might as well, everyone take a step back, I said last year, and we might as well function in a way that is fine for the whole world, and it is a fair process, and that's where we are at with our discussion. SARS VIP payroll includes political processes. Political processes are South Africa functions under BEE for uncertain reason. But South Africa's BEE relates to apartheid processes. Don't get me wrong if I say that the BEE, that is Black Economic, the process of information that you input on the payroll system, that relates to the skin color of the person, the nationality of the person, the family background of the person. Such information becomes political. And that's why I say the sensitivity of the payroll function itself and how it can affect the circumstances of the country. On such payroll system, you are required and requested to input information based on the BEE state of the organization itself, and based on how the country legislatively functions after the apartheid years. Ribea, Elise have a interest, thank you, that's my favorite word. I have a intriguingly interesting question. I've mentioned that before. You know that word in me. Intriguingly interesting question. If politically we are required to input that information onto the payroll system, and the payroll system holds the information, and we still deal with apartheid issues in the world internationally. And the SARS system is a payroll system in New Zealand. It functions in New Zealand. It functions in different organizations in Europe. It functions in China. It functions in Dubai. And Dubai has a lot of South Africans there that also works on the SARS system because of information sharing that becomes the offices in the world, that becomes a business. Where I've been employed at Stamford Plaza, you get Stamford Plaza in New Zealand, you get Stamford in Dubai, you get Stamford in South Africa, and one Stamford becomes the same international process, the same business. The country functions in that way, and international countries also functions in that way. And when the world still deals with the apartheidness of that, then we have a responsibility to understand the sensitivity of the information that we input on that system that relates to the skin color of one person and one household, and that relates to the nationality and the divisions that comes along with the Africanness of the world and the different European nationalities, right? When we allow ourselves to understand that the information was not necessarily used in advantage of the people of the country, because here today some African people in South Africa find themselves in poverty. Here today there's a whole lot of households in the coloredness of the communities that find themselves today in poverty. There's even white communities that find themselves in poverty in South Africa. And because of the sensitivity of the political process that also functions from that such information, we need to understand when we release such information around the world in general, how it might affect the circumstances of the world. So the political sharing of that information to Ribea, Elise, becomes a sensitivity. I know South Africa's strategy with the BEE functioning in the country was so that the country can employ people that are non-privileged and that are deprived, and that were the least deprived those years. and therefore the company can function in a way that is fair and fine. But we also know the disadvantages that is the political processes that relates to that information that goes to the international world in general. So that's my point number one about the search. The sensitivity of the system itself. Because that information are then released to countries that works hand in hand with certain organizations, and the information becomes sensitive to the government to be able to control the situation in the country before they can release such information to the international world. And having to learn that the African people in South Africa are very intelligent. They are very not dumb about it. How they manage their processes are very, very, very fair most of the time. And the intelligence behind how they manage South Africa is very interesting to me as well. So we do not disregard that. And therefore, we have the obligation to trust it into their hands to hold on to the sensitivity of how those informations might be abused in the international world. And if they are required to relay information based on those systems and processes, then let it come from the government itself, because the government itself knows its challenges that it had being black people, being the disadvantaged group in the international world. So when the government itself deals with the information, now we sit with the country South Africa, where Cyril Ramaphosa is the prime ministry leader, and where someone from the colored community of Cape Town sends a message to Dubai and to China, and they manage their processes the way that they want to, and Cyril Ramaphosa has just become an Vogue photo about it. Cyril Ramaphosa has just become an Vogue photo to the country. And because the world is like that, and people manage the country around you, and Jacob Zuma has been clear to say that my Nkandla is my Nkandla and it's my children's Nkandla. Because by the way that you are treating Ribea Elise in this world, if Ribea Elise has to sit in poverty, and if Brother Zaak Philander has to go and ask for a piece of bread, and if you all are going to wait for Aunt Jeanette Philander to come and pay for the world, for the house about it, while the children is in university, and then Jacob Zuma said, then I might as well take my Nkandla, and there is the land that I was born at, and I might as well own it myself so that my children and my grandchildren can on that day educate the world themselves and have everything they require to educate the world. And sometimes we have to do things like that to educate the world, that a fair process is somewhat important in our countries. And let me just continue with that. So that then only because Cyril Ramaphosa, that only becomes a Vogue face into South Africa itself. And when a Vogue face looks pretty, and no one adds on my Instagram pages, but everyone listens in, and my work is intriguingly interesting for them to press play on my podcast. And then it becomes intriguingly interesting that information and processes are going to be managed in South Africa without the approval of Cyril Ramaphosa, because most of the people run around him, contact China, contact America, via behind the scenes, via behind the grapevine, through Dubai, everyone travels, and Cyril Ramaphosa is just standing there as the picture of a Vogue, and he can be very kind about it. And he doesn't get angry about it. And he just says it because he says it. And on that day, our responsibility is to acknowledge our political leaders in all of these processes. Because there's a reason why they are the political leaders. There's a reason why they are there to prevent the aggression of apartheid to affect the international world in general. Because South Africa knows what they have experienced during the apartheid years. And South Africa has the advantage, the Africans of South Africa has the advantage to educate the international world on how to overcome the challenges of apartheid and of oppressions, you know. And that's why the Africans are in the political seat for the international world, because South Africa has got international babies that were born from South Africa, and that affects lots of international countries. So the international world find it important to listen to South Africa. And therefore, we should really, really respect the opinion of the political house, and we really don't want anyone to just have a good laugh for Cyril Ramaphosa as a Vogue face, but to really understand why Jacob Zuma had to take his Nkandla on that day. because the amount of time that I have to speak and explain myself becomes for me intriguingly interesting when you learn that the world wants to only manage the world in a way that they want to, and the world cannot be managed like that, because the force of the universe is that the universe functions in a way that it should function. It's that people want to force the universe, and the universe says, but the universe functions with every human being that has been birthed on earth, and that with every human being that forms part of the universe itself. And therefore, don't go diverting processes. That's point number one of the political processes that relates to VIP informations. Because VIP informations includes people of the black community in South Africa, people of the colored community in South Africa, people of the white communities, and people of the less advantaged in all of those community groups. Another thing that I've mentioned an important word, the less advantaged, because we now want to focus on the less advantaged and the VIP payroll system. The less advantage becomes that every employee, every business have a structure. And the structure is the business employs so many thousands of people at hunt season, and therefore the business has a responsibility to the country. It is to employ that amount of people in hunt season. Let's say 1,000 people in maximum, right? The business legislative responsibility to the countries, it has a maximum of 1,000 employees that are required to employ in 1 month, right? Let's say in 1 month. The business then retrieves its payroll information, and all the employees has been employed and now needs to get paid. The information goes onto the payroll system. The payroll system retrieves it because it now needs to be shared to the SARS, to the government itself system, and the SARS system of the government then functions with the information and relates that to the circumstances of the country, and relates that to getting the country out of the unemployment rate that it is at, right? And when the information are retrieved from the organization itself in the month of January, and in the month of January, there was 900 employees, and the organization is meant to have 1,000 employees, right? Now, SARS VIP retrieved the information. There's only 900 employees for this month. They do the payroll processing for the government, and they release the information. What is the responsibility that Ribea Elise educates SARS VIP, that is SARS itself, and the governmental function of SARS officers? And that the immediate requirement and legislative requirement to the people of the country, so that the country doesn't end up in another war, in apartheid years, is that the responsibility, because the government are still dealing with unemployment and with implementing organizations that can really fund households, right? So the responsibility that the current organizations have to the country itself and to its people itself is that when SARS and SARS officers receive the information from businesses, and on the month of January, by the 30th of January, they receive the information that there's now this month only 900 employees. And the organizational maximum structured requirement is to have 1,000 employees. And then it is the responsibility of SARS itself to communicate directly to the organization itself. And the SARS person needs to be an approved governmental leader that legislatively communicates to the organization itself and says that the organization has the responsibility to get the 100, to employ 100 employees before the 29th or 27th of the month of February, the next month. The SARS responsible person directly communicates the general manager of the organization. The email goes through, the information goes through, the administrator of SARS contacts the organization itself, and the organization therefore has received the email from SARS, the contact phone call from the reception or the administrator, the email that they need to go and just read the email, and the organization's responsibility to adhere to the legislative requirement of the country, so that the country are not disrupted, because the country deals with international countries' processes, and so that the country itself structures itself in a fine way, while the country is busy implementing other businesses for the unemployment rate of the country. And that's point number one that we want South Africa to work on. the responsibility between SARS and government becomes that SARS then acknowledges the fact that they have legislatively adhered to the requirement of being the financial holder of information for the country itself, and they have communicated to the organization, and they therefore have communicated in direct communication and have informed the organization of their responsibility to the country and to its people. And then SARS directly communicates the government, and the government directly finds a way in every month to make sure that the country abides to the legislative responsibility and legislative requirement that they have to the country and to its people to adhere to the economy and to the economical provision or requirement for the country and for government to abide to. And that is the responsibility then. So that is information that such VIP payroll, I know the payroll system makes a way for the amount of employees. The payroll system makes a way for the amount of employees that was not at the company. The payroll system gives in all accuracy the amount of employees that has gotten paid in that month. So there's no ways for the information to be all over the place, because such have a direct responsibility. And because when we deal with Mannekracht is the unemployment house of South Africa and the governmental house. Mannekracht finds their way all around the place the whole time. People have to run to Mannekracht to say they are looking for a job. And that is why we directly first want to deal with structuring the main function of the country that functions with the poverty circumstances of the country itself. And that, to Ribea, Elise, is the SARS, S-A-R-S, SARS house, the SARS offices. And because I have a requirement for the SARS officers to be not only the information holder of those informations, but to adhere to their legislative responsibility, that is all of our responsibilities as employees and as people of the country, to not aggress our country's circumstances and to adhere to whatever our responsibilities is, where we find ourselves in employment or where we find ourselves at in our daily requirements and responsibilities. So therefore, only because it is their responsibility of SARS to not only think that they are the information receiver and the information relayer between the people and between the payroll function of the country, and between certain governmental functions of South Africa, we want SARS to really understand their authority itself. And we want them to really, when they understand their authority, to not disregard it when they have to directly work with organizations, to not directly think that their function is only to blame the unemployment house of the country itself and of the government itself, that is called in South Africa Mannekracht, right? To not want to shift blame to Mannekracht. Because when we look at Mannekracht and the thousands of people that stands in the row by Mannekracht every month for a piece of bread and for some money, and then we learn that the communication needs to be clear and it needs to be direct, and the information holder doesn't only hold information, but they have authority. And the authority that have been given the SARS office of South Africa and the IRD officers New Zealand is the authority of communication between the governmental requirement and responsibility to its people and between the authority holder, that is SARS officers themselves, South Africa. And because they have a responsibility to adhere to, we want them to not only think that they adhere to the responsibility the way that they want to, but we want them to understand the communication required between them and the organization itself is not only an email that they send through every now and often when it is payroll time. It is the sensitivity of how that email affects the state of the country and where the country is at. And when you learn that in that email there's so much information, someone has sent to me a lot of emails over the months on my Vote email about $1 billion and $1 million. When you receive such information, and then you understand and you realize the authority that we have. I know that I've spoken about it last year a lot on my HR2023 about the SARS structuring, but they probably didn't. Some people press played on my Facebook page, yes, And it's government's responsibility to press play because I have been employed in South Africa and it is my career history and it affects the people of the country and it forms part of the Office of the World and the Office of South Africa in general. Ribea Elise forms part of it because of my employment, because of my career history, because of where I found myself at, and because of the roles that I've been employed at in South Africa for government of South Africa to press play and to listen to about business education at hunt time and season. Another thing that I want to mention, so that's point number 1 of SARS responsibility. The responsibility becomes that effective only if we learn that if everyone just sends an email and everyone just leaves the email there and it doesn't affect everyone, then we know, okay, now we're going to have to get serious about how SARS relay that information to the organization, because it is not only an email. It should not only be a communication over computer and over technological process of emailing one another, but it should be directly firm and strict relating to the authority that SARS have over the financial circumstances of the country and the authority that government therefore presents and represents in the duties of being governmental leaders and the political house of the country. That's our number 1 thing that we want everyone to focus on. I know last year we have discussed it and no one knew what Ribea was saying and everyone realized what I was saying and everyone tried to find a way around it. But for me directly, I've mentioned on my page when I've mentioned about Melvina, I said I'm very direct, and sometimes in this world we have to be very direct because all of these things affect your day, your life, your household, your children's upbringing, and affect everything about us. Another thing, okay, now international countries, Africa itself, SARS payroll. So for the international countries, I want y'all to listen to what I now have to say before we're going to conclude this video, because we're doing this discussion every Monday. So next Monday, we can again focus on the circumstances of that poverty circumstance and the SARS payroll function, businesses that works on SARS, businesses that buys into one another's businesses that works on SARS. In South Africa, it's educated under BEE. If your company functions under BEE, and then all the BEE businesses buy into your organization in some way, and the communication becomes a one-house communication. And that process is a requirement for international countries, especially. African people have traveled for years to South Africa, and the processes were implemented, and the processes functions well in South Africa. We are the babies of those processes, and we find ourselves now in the international world. But our South African responsibility is to educate to our African countries the requirements that they have to understand the systems that South Africa functions on, being African babies that our parents traveled from poverty countries into South Africa, and the process becomes a one-house funding process where the international world make businesses with one another when they buy into certain systems and certain processes. And SARS payroll system, VIP system, is the number 1 system that most organizations in the world buys into, and that means that they make business in one another and in accordance to how those processes functions. It becomes easier because if the Chinese government sells SARS VIP to South Africa, and the Chinese government are then the funder of their businesses in South Africa that relates not only to the SARS payroll system, but to businesses that they also have in South Africa. And because they understand their system, exactly how their system are meant to function, they bought into South African businesses, and South African businesses had an opportunity to learn how the process functions, and it has really advanced South Africa's financial circumstances. So it has really given South Africa the advantage of becoming economically stronger and of becoming an economically fairer in a world that has third world and first world processes. Are South Africa moving into first world countries? We can say that they are economically fairing themselves up with other countries in the world. Based on that, people buy then into the international sports, into the rugby. When you buy into a SARS payroll system, you buy into different functions and different businesses. There is the one office of the SARS. There is not only an office on a computer, but becomes a business evoked. There is an office, and the business evokes then sits in different different political and business leaders of the country's meetings, and different of both businesses are then functioning in different countries as well. So that's how the SARS payroll system works and how it functions. That's not the only dependent system in the country and the number one system, but it might just be the number one functioning system. That is how businesses are invented and implemented in countries. So for the African countries that have found themselves in poverty, number one education that you get from your African people in South Africa is the SARS payroll functioning of the system. There's a lot of information relating to that, BEE information, a lot of training and development that goes hand in hand with that SARS system. And the SARS system is the information holder, but it becomes an office itself, and it is an office that you structure and that you build exactly. That becomes a business, that becomes economy, the economy that is advancing the people in the international world. And that's our number one education that we wanted to have the first week with our HR 2024 business restructuring with Ribea, Elise. I know I've explained a lot. I made it a little bit clear what I'm explaining. If people really want to listen in more what I'm saying, content between governmental leaders, they can contact one another based on what I'm explaining. If people really want to find out where South Africa is at amongst other businesses in the world, contact South Africa's political house. They would be too kind to share information on how other countries can get out of their poverty circumstances. Because I believe as South Africa, we are one house. We have learned to be one house. When we were once in apartheid, we have overcome that, and we are a one house country. And let us allow ourselves to educate that thoroughly. And that is it, everyone, with our education today. HR 2024 business restructuring with Ribea, Elise. Have an amazing season further.